thank you so much for inviting me to your lovely school and for being here after school on this beautiful spring afternoon. So this is a very dedicated, serious crowd that I'm talking to, and I appreciate giving me your time here. My name is Sean Ahern. I have been a teacher for 16 years in the New York City public school system. I currently teach incarcerated youth culinary arts on Rikers Island. I'm also the chapter leader, not the chapter leader, I'm the delegate for the East River Academy on Rikers Island. And I'm also a member of some of the groups that have sprung up, you know, during the dark days of the Bloomberg administration to raise the hue and cry against some of the things that were being done in New York City schools. Teachers Diversity Committee of New York City, the Economic and Social Justice Committee of the United Federation of Teachers, Teachers Unite, the Coalition for Public Education, and the Movement of Rank and File Educators, which is a caucus that's running in the UFT election. So for about 12, 14 years, a number of New York City teachers and education activists have been calling attention to a decline in the Black and Latino teachers in New York City. We first came across, in 2004, we came across some data that showed a very sharp decline in the number of Black and Latino teachers hired in 2002. And it coincided with the beginning of mayoral control under Mayor Bloomberg. And we also noticed that for decades prior to this point, there had been a slow but steady incremental increase in the number of Black and Latino teachers coming in to teach, and Asian teachers coming in to teach in New York City. Recall that, I mean, I grew up in New York City. I was a student in the 60s and, you know, graduated high school in 71. I was a ninth grader in 68. And the number of teachers, Black and Latino teachers in New York City schools was minuscule. And you could probably count the principals and assistant principals on one hand. It was a major issue in the whole struggle over community control in the late 60s, 1968. It was one of the central focuses. And gradually, we came up to the point where there were Black teachers in New York City schools, Latino teachers, Asian teachers. Not that many, still far below what the student body is, but they were there. And every year it seemed to be more. Comes 2002, I'm looking at the data sheet. As a matter of fact, let me just hand this out quickly. Can you all have this? It will also have a, it'll also have the contact information in case you want to contact the Teacher Diversity Committee for more information. Just pass this around. This is just the data that we collected from the DOE, from the Independent Budget Office, usually sort of around the way, because, you know, who are we? You're just a teacher, you know. So we had to get a reporter to ask them questions, and the Bloomberg administration would always be, you know, was always very press conscious and wanted to give things to the press. So we would get information sort of around about. But all of this information comes from the DOE or the Independent Budget Office. So you can see, looking at this, you'll see in, say, for example, in 2001, 2002, that's the last year before Bloomberg, you see 27.2% of the teachers hired in New York City were Black. Down to 2012, 2013, and it's 11.6%. So we saw, you know, what's going on here. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was paying any attention to it. So we started to go around and trying to just stick these numbers in people's faces. Look at this. What's happening? This is moving in the wrong direction, you know. And we went around to the UFT. We went around to teacher groups and community groups and CECs and anybody who would basically let us say something to try to draw attention to just these numbers, like what's up. Finally, we got resolutions passed. Yours truly, Mark Torres, was involved in helping to bring a resolution in 2010 to the Delegate Assembly at the UFT. And many people, Dr. Anna Maria Thomas has been on this for 10 years at least. and she's a constant inspiration because she never gives up. She never gives up.
Neither do you.
And, you know, when you get frustrated with people saying, oh, so what difference does it make? Because it'd be a lot, you know, anytime you talk about race in America, it gets very, very tense. And a lot of people didn't really even want to talk about it. Like, and a lot of people became very defensive. What are you trying to say? A white teacher can't teach a black kid? Well, you know, people would get, sometimes it would get ugly, you know? But, and it was very discouraging that adults, educated adults, couldn't really think about this and have a conversation about this. It was hard. It was like hurt, you know? But we stuck with it, and now, guess what? Now, everybody's for teacher diversity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a slew of articles. Benita, where's Benita? Benita pointed out to me, she's been involved with this for many years. She's helping us get a website together. She pointed me towards the Washington Post. Our old friend John King from the New York State Education Department, now the Secretary of Education, he's got a big article in the Washington Post, you know, about the need for teacher diversity. Well, when he was here in New York, it was a very different story. So everybody's for it. The AFT came out with a 120-page pamphlet, teacher diversity. Gee. Mayor Bloomberg has just announced, you might see the ads in the subways. Men Teach, New York City. We're going to hire 1,000 black men to teach in New York schools by 2017.
De Blasio.
De Blasio said, you know, he hired this group. Wow, sounds good. But so now that everybody's about teacher diversity, I keep reading these things and say, oh, this is great. You know, we really did our job. We really put it on the agenda, and people see that this is something that we got to solve. I'm reading these things. Do you find it a little strange when everybody says they agree with this, but no one points to a single cause? When de Blasio will partner with this foundation-funded group, that's, by the way, it's headed from a guy from Homeland Security, not from New York. His graduate degrees are in criminal justice.
Oh.
You know, he's in charge of Men Teach. And, okay, I'm all for having black men come into schools and teach. But it's like, well, it's always been sort of pretty much a women's profession. What is this thing about, you know, that it has to be black men? You know, why could it be black women? Latino women? You know? Yeah, it's like, so, but I mean, the idea of bringing black men is a positive thing. But you ever hear this idea of like perception management? That somebody realizes that, you know, if you can't fight them, join them, and I'm going to get in front of this issue, and I'm going to make sure that it unfolds the way I want it to unfold.
Right.
Without touching anything or disturbing anything that actually is causing the problem in the first place. What is the machinery? What is these institutions? What are the policies and practices that cause a 10-year decline? While the population, particularly of Latin students and Asian students, has increased. What's going on here? And if you really want to do something, wouldn't you want to say that's got to be changed, or this policy has to be changed, or doing this in the wrong way, or this has no basis, this particular hurdle should go, and this is a viable way to evaluate teachers or to hire teachers or attract them. There's no discussion. You hire a nonprofit, you give them money, they have an ad campaign, and I guess we're all supposed to just go to sleep, and because God knows there's a lot of other things that we can do with our time. You know, I don't know about you, but it's been a struggle to like give up your own personal time and sacrifice your personal life to go and talk about something that half the people don't want to hear. So, okay, and I thought about it for a few months, and I said, you know what? There's something not right about this. There's something not right about it. And I'll try to, I don't want to go on for too long, and I had this, you know, talk, but I sort of lost it. But So I talked about the education reform, because that's what we're talking about. None of these people talk about that somehow the disappearing of Black and Latino educators is at all related to all those aspects of mayoral control and high stakes testing and school closings and rubber rooms and ATRs and charter school push-ins. For some reason, this has nothing to do with anything that has happened in the last 15 years. We're just going to go out and put out the ads as if the problem was, well, the Black and Latinos just weren't applying for the job. Maybe they didn't know the address. That's the problem. But when you look at what's actually been going on for the past 15 years, you begin to open it up and you see a very different picture. A picture that I believe requires people to point to the real causes of the disappearance in the first place, to change policy and practices in the New York City Department of Education. And by example, hopefully the country, because this is the biggest system in the country.
In the world, really.
In the world, okay? And we're members of the biggest union local in the United States, left standing, you know? So I think that we could really do something very positive and very good by starting to look at the root causes of this thing and propose positive remedies. And not just sit back and say, oh, they got it covered. That's it. John King's up there taking care of it. He's the education secretary. The Albert Schenker Institute is on it. Michael Mulgrew, he's all for it. But when you look at what's going on, that's not the situation. Not only, as we looked at it more, was not only the hiring that we saw as like wrong, but it was something else. In 2003, I was a new teacher. I started in '99, so I got my tenure, and I'm just, lifting my head up and see, after you get your tenure, you can lift up your head and say, look around and say, well, what's going on here, And there was a demonstration in City Hall. I don't live that far from City Hall. I live in the Lower East Side. In 2003, there were a large group of teachers marching around City Hall. Well, it wasn't that large, but they were marching, and I learned about the case of Galeno versus the Board of Education. What is that? Does anybody know what Galeno versus the Board of Education is? Turns out that in 1998, the New York State Education Department mandated that every teacher in New York State had to pass a teacher certification exam, or they would be removed from their position. And we're talking about people who maybe had served 10 years.
And they lost their job.
They might have advanced degrees. If it had been up to a principal, they would have fought for this person. Nobody asked the principal's opinion. Nobody asked what their actual practice was in the classroom. Nobody consulted with any parents or community or anything. If you didn't pass this test, you're out. They announced it in 1998. By 2003, 10,000 people. Union members of the UFT, dues-paying members, people who had established careers as teachers, out the door. There wasn't a single, and I am a pro-union person, I'm a UFT delegate, there was not a single representative from the UFT leadership at that rally. 10,000 people. They filed the case, Galeno versus the Board of Education, and Bloomberg fought them tooth and nail for the next decade. Finally, new mayor, new judge, federal district court, her name was Kimba Woods. You might have heard of her name. She was considered for a while to be a Supreme Court justice. Anyway, she made a ruling. She said, this test has never been validated. You might be familiar with the fireman's exam, right? The test has never been validated. In other words, there has never been anything, no data, no study, anything, not a shred to show that this test has anything to do with teacher performance, student achievement, teacher retention, nothing. SED, they just made up a test. Oh, wait, we're the gatekeepers. We are the, we're the guardians. Everybody's got to pass this test that we're going to make. Well, they probably didn't even make it, right? They probably contracted it out to, I don't know, was it Pearson? This is one of these test companies.
The publishing.
So, the judge says the test is not valid. And not only is it not valid, everybody is now part of a class who was affected by this, and the city is responsible to pay damages. Oh, well, the city cried, we didn't make them take the test, it was the state. Judge says, you're the employer, it's on you. You have the responsibility to hire them and to dismiss them in this case, or to demote them. City, so de Blasio, newly elected Mayor de Blasio, to his credit said, I'm not going to do what Bloomberg did and just drag it out for another decade on appeals. I'm going to settle it. Okay, I'm not appealing it. And the city is now stuck with a bill, probably around close to $400 million. I mean, they're still sorting out who is owed what. And after all these years, people have died.
Right.
Imagine, you're a mature adult and you're thrown out of your job. You thought you had a career, and now you don't have a job. It's quite a blow. So so now, in addition to the hiring practices, like why are they hiring fewer and fewer Black and Latino teachers and hiring more and more young whites who don't stay, who cycle in and out of the system, and goes on their resume and off they go.
Write a book.
What's
TFA.
TFAs, and so now it's not just the hiring that they're doing, and they have it's like an ideological mindset. Who's the ideal candidate? We want somebody from a prestigious private or public university, right? That's our model candidate. Is that necessarily going to be your best teacher? Is that somebody who's going to commit to serving in difficult schools? It doesn't matter. And they didn't need any evidence. It's a sort of elite arrogance that, the pedigree is there, And of course, right off the bat, if you're identifying that category as your ideal new teacher, well, chances are there's a lot more of them who are upper middle class or upper class white kids than there are kids who are coming from New York City, who grew up in the projects, right, or went to a community college, right? So right there and then, by their framing of what is the ideal candidate, they've done that. But now here, they're kicking people out. They're pushing people out. So the thing is getting more complicated. Then, as Bloomberg and Klein proceed to unfold their education reform, schools are being closed. Which schools? Guess. The underperforming, the failing schools, right? And where are these schools? These are in poor neighborhoods. These are predominantly Black and Latino kids, right? Kids from the projects going there. Kids who maybe don't even have projects. Maybe they're sleeping in grandmother's house or whatever it is. Homeless kids. Kids with a lot of challenges, right? Now they're labeled as failures. Their school is a failure. And because we love you so much, we're going to shut it down. Guess who's the teachers predominantly in those schools? Disproportionately Black and Latino teachers. The school is closed down. Now the teachers don't have a permanent assignment. You could be a 30-year senior teacher with a doctorate.
And become an ATR.
And now you're an ATR. And maybe if you got really stressed out and you got really pissed off and you yelled at somebody or maybe even cursed somebody out, now you're in the rubber room, a detention center for bad teachers. We're not talking about child rapists. We're not talking about drug addicts. We're talking about people who maybe, didn't get along with the principal or said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Now you are in the rubber room. You might stay there for months at a time. You don't even know what the charge is. Months, months. You might have to go hire lawyers to try to defend you. Is the UFT helping you?
Nope.
No. They're standing there trying to keep their head down and trying to stay out of trouble, you know? Make a deal here, make a deal there. So who is in the rubber rooms? Again, it's predominantly or disproportionately Black and Latino educators. Disproportionately. And they're placed in crowded, unventilated rooms with inadequate facilities. It's disgusting. It's oppressive. It's depressing. And you sit there for months, hoping that you'll just get sick and tired and get out of here.
Or die.
Or die. The ATRs. Now I don't have a job. I'm at top salary. And now, thanks to Bloomberg's, school budgeting, school-based budgeting plan, well, a principal's going to think twice. Well, Jesus, I got to pay you $100,000 a year. But maybe somebody else could do pretty much the same job, or maybe not as good, but pretty good, and I got to pay them a starting salary. These are things that Bloomberg created, disincentives to hire the senior teachers. This is part of the education reform. And as we're looking at it, we're looking at this thing, oh my God, charters, charter push-ins, existing schools. The bean counters from Tweed come around and they calculate vacant unused space in your school. Oh, you mean you have a teacher in a room and they're only teaching 5 periods a day? That's unutilized space. You have a trailer out there where you use for classrooms, but you're not really utilizing it enough. Underutilized space. You have a library? Well, geez, this is big. How does this get utilized? You got like some storage rooms that maybe, all these things become part of a formula to determine underutilized space. Now, an underutilized school has room for Eva Moskowitz to squeeze in one of her Success Academies. What happens to all the other teachers? And I was in a building like this. Everything gets squeezed up, she gets the whole floor, and all of a sudden the teachers lose their rooms, they're moving around from room to room, you lose your labs, you lose this, you lose that, you're sharing this facility, this facility, this facility. It changes the whole character of the school. It changes the experience of the students in that school. And guess who Eva Moskowitz in particular is hiring? We had one of the teachers for the Teacher Diversity Committee, she contacted the DOE. She said, what is the staff demographic in the charter schools? Oh, we don't collect data on that. Well, how would I get it? Well, you'll have to contact Success Academy. Contact Success Academy. What is the demographic of your teaching staff? Oh, we don't keep that information. You have to go and contact the individual school. So here's just a teacher, a regular teacher like one of us, concerned about an issue and can't get any information. She writes, because she was another woman who was very determined and not easily dissuaded. She wrote 34 requests to all these little Success Academies. I have the data here. We published it on the internet. Success Academy has a far worse record of hiring. They are more disproportionately white than any of the public schools, including schools that there were schools, we saw the numbers, schools that have 100% of the students are black, and it's like 2 teachers of color on staff. It's worse. But when Mr. King was the head of the New York State Education Department, he was ramming those schools into every, a proposal didn't come by his desk that he did not check off. And now, he's all for getting the black men in schools. Okay, I'm glad you changed your mind, but how are you going to do that? And are you going to touch any of these milestones or key parts of the education reform? The policy, the whole juggernaut of policies and practices that make up education reform? Are you gonna touch any of that? Or are you just telling us to dazzle us and so that we don't look at actually what is happening? Because that's what needs to be changed and that's what needs to be looked at. Okay, I gotta wrap this up.
So we're gonna go till 5:30. Do you wanna stop in 5 minutes or?
I don't wanna,
All right.
it's,
So
it's a beautiful
Yeah.
afternoon, I don't wanna like
Okay.
push my luck here. But, so,
Can I ask you, ask you something?
yes.
You know, I'm now, after hearing you speak, I'm thinking about the 55-25 program. You know, like I knew when they did that, you could retire at 55 and 25 years, that they were like, I thought was trying to just get rid of those high salaried people. But now, like thinking about it and hearing what you're saying, I could see how like, yeah, we're gonna get rid of a whole bunch of people and then we'll flood them with young white people from out of state. I mean, there's no New Yorkers coming here anymore either. Right? So I mean, they're out, you know, they're from all over the country. So it just made me think about those hidden agendas, you know?
Yeah, very true. That's very true. I think it was also partially so she could get the contract over and make herself look good before she went to be national
Right,
UFT president.
right.
But
Randy
that's a separate
Weingarten?
issue.
Yeah.
That's a separate issue. By the way,
Probably-
with one hand they gave 55-25, and then for the unborn, what do they do to them?
Yeah.
They're paying
Yeah.
They're
They
paying-
have nothing.
they're paying that 3% or is it 5%? They're paying that for their entire school, their entire careers, whereas all those other people stop paying after 10 years.
Right.
So
Right.
there was a trade-off there,
Right.
which is a very, penny wise, dollar foolish kind of situation. So anyway, I talked about what de Blasio is trying to do now and how the situation has changed. So, okay, let's just briefly, I'd like to just outline, okay, what's going on now and what should people do about it? And I would like to propose, as much as I am a critic of some of the UFT practices and AFT in particular, Leo Casey, who used to be my vice president and who I know, I had conversations with him and been in meetings with him and, argued with him. He is now a big shot. He's in charge of the Albert Shanker Institute in Washington, D.C. And he's responsible for this megatome study, right? Of course, some of us in this room were involved with like, hey, wake up, do something about the disappearing, do something about these hiring policies. This is an important issue. And he actually motivated the resolution at the AFT, at the UFT meeting, right? Finally, because they didn't even want to get it to the floor. They said, oh, you don't have to bring it to the floor, it's already done.
Mm-hmm.
It's already done. I said, no, it's got to come before the delegates. Let them hear it. So finally it got up there and, I think only Abe Levine voted against it, one of the old Shanker stalwarts. But I'm reading this. I said, how are you writing all this stuff here? And not once are you talking about what caused the problem in the first place. He says it in the back here. Causes should be studied in future efforts. No mention of what's causing anything, right? But so I said, oh yeah, a real windbag, a real academic windbag if there ever was one. But I'm looking for, when you're desperate, you're looking for an opening. You're looking for some place to get in. And there is one here. Here it is from the AFT, the big shots, right? It's just a slight mention on page 109. 109. Teacher unions should use contract negotiations as a vehicle for increasing teacher diversity. Guess what, folks? We have a contract coming up.
All right.
What does teacher diversity have to do with our contract? More than you think. More than you think. And I would say that if we want to have a decent contract, I think that we're going to have to raise a little bit of hell. We have those raises coming in the last 2 years, 19 and 20. Not raises, that's our back pay, right? That's after the contract's already over, That money is sort of being held hostage over there,
That's right.
And
If you
even
stay
if
with the system.
even if de Blasio, right, if you stay, even if de Blasio is a nice guy, even if he wants to collaborate with teachers in the UFT, what about Cuomo? What about Eva Moskowitz? What about all the wolves circling him that you read about all the time.
And King, down in Washington,
Right.
D.C.
So I think we're in for a fight. And I think that if a teacher union is going to be able to defend learning and working conditions and gain a decent contract for teachers, I think that we need to be a voice for justice, fairness, equality. That's a message to the communities that we serve, to our own students. It's a form of student advocacy to say, you too, do your homework, kid. You know, pay attention. And yeah, you can grow up and be a teacher. Okay? What's wrong with that? But that's student advocacy, isn't it? How can we stand around and say, and see this, what's going on, and just, no. It's part, I believe it's part of a teacher's job to advocate for the students. It's probably one of the most important things, right? And if you see some injustice going on in society that's going to affect your students, well, I think it is the job of teachers to the best that we can. We're not super people, but we're members of this big, powerful union, right? If the teachers union can be a voice for real teacher diversity, addressing what's causing the problem, I think that will enhance our whole efforts to improve learning and working conditions. I think you're talking about a movement, because when you start talking about people coming together, blacks, whites, Latinos, and openly saying this kind of discrimination, or this kind of preferential hiring of whites over blacks and Latinos, that this is wrong, that this is not in our benefit, it's not in our students' benefit. That vibrates. That's big in this country. And I think that it could really help us, help schools. And not to mention, of course, it could really make some breakthroughs about this disappearing of the Black and Latino educators. So that's one thing. Now, I'm going to finish it up now, but there are certain demands that I think that can be made in the course of the contract, but it all depends on what people want to do, right? There's no fund, there's no organization, there's no, foundation grants here. It's just what grassroots people are willing to say and do in whatever format, to whatever extent that people can. Right? It's just us, folks. And we can demand that they restore the integration transfer that Randy Weingarten eliminated from the contract because she made a deal with Bloomberg about contracts, right? It was eliminated. It used to be, it's not in the contract anymore. It used to be that a teacher was allowed to move around to transfer to another school if that was going to improve the integration of the staff. That was eliminated. Now, this whole big, huge tome says, oh, well, the problem is teacher retention because, the Black and Latino teachers, they work in the most difficult situations, so they don't stay on the job, they cycle out of the system. Of course, Leo Casey knows that is not the case in New York City because I was at a table meeting with him and the teaching fellows, and I asked them directly, is there a different rate of retention for black teachers versus the white teachers that are coming out of the teaching fellows? They said, yes, the Black and Latino teachers stay. The white teachers leave.
Even if they're already fellows. You're
Yeah.
just in fellows.
The fellows. So he knows that retention is not the issue in New York City. As a matter of fact, quite the reverse. Quite the reverse. But if we take him at his word, retention, okay, well, why shouldn't a Black or Latino teacher be able to transfer out to a school that's like sort of in a nice, middle class, suburban, semi-suburban situation where it's, you're not, pulling your hair out all the time. It's not a stressful situation. Why shouldn't they be able to have that job? Why does it have to be a preserve for white teachers? Right? So we can demand the integration transfer to put it back. And that breaks up this whole education reform system that Bloomberg has put in place here. Because that breaks up this idea of the principal can do the hiring, just solely, right, without anybody telling him anything. The other thing that we can do, there is no central, when Bloomberg destroyed the Board of Education, there is no central oversight over who is being hired in New York City. None. There's nobody there to call up a principal. Well, geez, you had 15 black teachers apply for a job in your school over the past 5 years, and not a single one got a job. Nobody's calling anybody about this. You know? So there has to be transparency.